All right. Guys, can you hear me well? Over here, over there? Okay. So first and foremost, thank you so much for coming to the session. There's a lot of great sessions happening right now, and amongst all of those, you just choose to be here. Thank you so much for that. Well, today my talk is going to be about data modeling 101, and I would like to demystify a little bit about lake housing and data modeling. And there's a reason why the audience is crowded, because even though data modeling is just from the past decade, we still have a lot of issues and a lot of unknowns regarding how we're going to put modeling principles and strategies inside on top of Data Lakehouse. And this is what I would like to discuss today. But before I get started, I would like to introduce myself a little bit. Promise, I'm not going to take too much of your time, but that's my name, Luan. I'm from Brazil. I've been boots on the ground for the past 17 years. For the 17 years, I would say that 7, 8, they're totally focused on data engineering stuff. So I saw the rise of the data lake housing. I was in fact in the event where Maciel just released the Delta Lake, which was a huge leap on the data analytics ecosystem. I'm just Spark and Databricks expert. I'm just Microsoft MVP for the past 10 years in a row, and also I became the very first Brazilian to hold the Databricks MVP. Databricks MVP is a program that talks about how people share content across the globe, and we are here exactly to do it. So we have a booth on the expo as well, so if you'd like to come and visit us, it would be a pleasure to talk a little bit more. And also I have the pleasure to be with the Databricks Product Advisory Board. So I'm just deeply focused and in tune with the Databricks folks to talk a little bit about the experience, the data engineering things such as Lakeflow, DLT, and stuff like that. Well, before we get started, I would like to get a sense a little bit about the audience. So just a quick show of hands for people that are currently implementing or have like the Medallion Architecture on your organizations. Just nice, a solid 80%. That's perfect. Now, just for the honest ones, bear with me. You have gold tables in your lake house that you're not sure if anyone actually uses. Okay, I think 30%. Okay. And lastly, you ever debated whether something should go in silver or gold based on whether it's operational or analytical? Yeah, just don't be shy, because I have this problem a lot. I just quite get this problem a lot. And this is what I'm trying to unfold here. I'm going to try to bring some experiences from the trenches alongside for all my years of implementing solutions and data lake solutions for medium and large customers as well. And of course, I would like to start off the foundation, right? So when we talk about lake house, we're talking about, I like to put it this way. There's a lot of ways to show this, but I would like to see as 3 layers. The first layer is where you sit and how you sit the data into the data lake. So just pushing the data from different sources into the data lake, which is a file format, right? And here we would like to make sure that we're using optimized file formats, such as Avro or RC and Parquet. The second stage is where your data lakehouse lies. So you have your different styles of lake housing, which is Delta Lake, Iceberg, and Hudi, which is a table format. So here you truly get the best of your data lake plus the data warehousing capabilities, meaning that you have ACID, you have concurrency, you have schema enforcement, you have the whole shebang. All the things that we would love to have in the data warehousing we have by the data lake house. And lastly, we have the Medallion Architecture, which is truly a data design on top of data lake house. And that's interesting because if we look for a second, when we think a little bit about bronze, silver, and gold, we are truly think about the maturity level and the process and stages that takes to your data through the release to the final user. And final user could be another pipeline, could be a user truly consuming it, can be a C-level report, can be a dashboard, could be anything you want. And this is where I think it gets a little bit messy when you start to think a bit about each one of them and responsibilities about each one of these layers. And this talk is going to be exactly about that. How do we unfold the bronze, silver, and gold in such a way that we can deliver the maximum capacity? and how do we use modeling techniques inside of these layers to take the most of the data lakehouse. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about this right now. The bronze layer. I would say that fairly bronze layer is just pretty straightforward. Is the easiest part. Basically, you just have to think one-to-one mapping, one-to-one replication, meaning that if you have different data sources, and if you'd like to bring the data from the different data sources into your Medallion architecture, what you're going to do is you're going to bring them as one-to-one mapping, which means that you have a direct replication from the source data. So if you have a Kafka topics with 100 tables, 100 topics, you're going to end up with 100 bronze tables on your bronze layer, right? We don't have any business logic. We don't do anything about the data except for adding metadata. And I strongly recommend you to think a little bit about metadata. Metadata drives the whole good process around data processing at scale. So always considering when you're moving data from source to the bronze, adding data metadata such as ingestion timestamp, source form, who did that detailed process. So as more metadata you bring to the table, the better you're going to see how the data fits into the bronze architecture. So the bottom line here is just that start simple by capturing everything and then transforming nothing. And that's a lot of questions around this regarding, oh, should I just bring all data to here? Yeah, well, that truly depends on your business. But in the end of the day, what I realized across a different lakehouse platform that I was trying to implement is that eventually people would like to consume pretty much all the data from your data sources. So eventually what we discovered is it would be much easier to have one system that ingests the data and just push it there instead of having different ETLs doing this. So we just want to make sure they're not copying different same data here multiple times. We just have to reduce this. And eventually what's going to happen here is you have a layer that sits in between the data sources and the bronze layer that brings you the capability to ingest data incrementally or in CDC form. Okay, that's just pretty basic stuff. Second, we're going to talk about the silver layer. And I don't know about you guys, but that's where things get a little bit nerdier here. That's a lot of articles out there. There's a lot of great books out there like the Data Lake Definitive Guide, the Medallion Architecture Implementations. Those are really great books that pretty much talks about the nuts and bolts in how you're going to build up your bronze, silver, and gold layer. But be careful because this part is the trickiest one. It's really hard to make that right. And in the way that you manage to do this, it's going to truly unfold how you're going to leverage that data into the gold layer. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the silver layer because this, in fact, is the most important one. We have two basic techniques here. We can truly use third normal form to pretty much bring the data from bronze. You just push into silver. You just apply minimal transformations on it. The focus here is to be right optimize it because you would like to make sure that we're ingesting data as fast as possible. Or, in the end of the day, what you'd like to do is, since data lake housing is about data integration, you could use like some immense capability to receive data from different sources, then just collapse them into the ODS, and then you deliver this data to the gold layer. But if you read about the articles out there, you're going to see that whenever people are talking about silver layer, they're always talking about just enough transformation. And what does it mean? Just enough transformations, right? There's a little bit, it looks simple, but if you just dive deep into that, it gets a little bit hard to understand what does it mean. Because in the end of the day, we have to have enterprise-wide view inside of the silver. The silver is going to be the place where we're going to group, organize, cleanse the data to deliver faster gold layers, gold tables to the end, to the final users. So that part is pretty important. And lastly, the gold layer. The gold layer is where truly the users are going to read data from. They're going to consume your data. And in terms of data modeling techniques, in the ways that you can leverage this is you have two options truly here. Actually, you have other ones, but these are the most common used ones. which is the story schema. Everybody is just aware of this time schema? Just raise your hands, just a little bit. Okay, just pretty much everybody, good. That's Kimball style, and we can opt to go to full-blown one big table. It's funny when start to deal with data teams, and we're discussing which one is the best to deliver. There's always this talk about Kimball or one big tables are best, and truly depends on the use case that you're trying to achieve. There's no right and wrong answer here. In fact, you just need to understand about the business requirement in order to choose between them. But sometimes you're going to see that even inside of domains or departments, you're going to see like this delivering processing happening not in only on one way. You're going to be two ways. You're going to have some story schema and you have some OBTs. There's a lot of fighting against this because people are trying to always put the feet on the ground and say, hey, you must use story schema or you must use OBT. But actually what we're going to see here at this presentation is that you don't have to actually fight. You don't have to actually choose one or another. Instead, you can have both if you have a foundational silver layer well established. And that's the provoking question that I would like to raise right now. Can we use both? Because there's a lot of discussions about that. We're going to discover this in a minute. So the common thing that we get from out of the consulting engagements that I've been part of is that we're built by the bugs. We have all the layers. They are working bronze, silver, and gold, but isn't working properly. It's not working the way that it used to work. And the answer is not actually about the pattern, because pattern is about you following something. It doesn't mean that it's going to be 100% fitable to your use case. You have to adjust as per your needs. But it's truly about the maturity stage they're in right now. And by discovering the stage that you're right now, that gonna gives you like a little bit of space to think about what comes next. And that's where I started to talk a little bit about how I'm gonna approach the session here. Because being out of the woods, just in these consulting engagements and see how customers operate inside of Medallion Architecture, I figured out that there's no right and wrong answer, but instead, maybe we could have a methodology on top of Medallion Architecture to help you to achieve what you truly want. Because in the end of the day, we just need to get speed. You have to bring data to your end user. You have to guarantee that you're going to be able to deliver as fast as possible. You know, a lot of things are changing. In a minute, you have to be adaptable. So this is the idea of Medallion Architecture. Maybe not stick with all the needs that you truly want right now, but also thinking a little bit through the process is going to help you to unravel what you can take the maximum of each one of this. So we have this first stage, what we usually call copy and paste architecture. And what does it mean is, basically what we're doing is we have different data sources. We bring this data to bronze. And I'm just push some SQL statement here to make it easier for us to understand. And there's some people laughing here because it truly happens and that's normal. You're just adding some metadata, for example, current timestamp, and just make this as a low timestamp, which is fine. We are adding metadata on top of bronze. That's extremely correct. This is the best process, best way to do it. Secondly, you're just bringing the data with silver. However, you're not applying anything. You don't have any domain logic applied. You don't have any other munging strategy applied here. You're just simply removing, taking out the customer ID, which is not null, because it may not be acceptable for your end user. And look what happens in the end. You have renaming columns without any optimizations. That doesn't ring any bells for you guys? I have seen this happening a lot. And if you ask me, is this wrong approach? No, it's not. Because sometimes, in the way they approach this, you're just thinking a little bit about the straightforward ETL process kind of workflow that you used to do in the past with data warehousing, if you think. So you have your ETL, you have your staging area on bronze, you do your transformations on silver, and then you build up the story schema on the gold layer. And that's fine. But there's like some problems here with this implementation. So first, you're just copying data in different places. And trust me, I was in a customer and we were like doing like some assessments and we found out that for the data duplication, he had 10 terabytes of data. because of this, because they're basically moving the same data across all the layers and delivering the data in gold. And guess what? A lot of customers and a lot of data platform engines, they say, well, you cannot let people get into the silver, which means that if you want to access, interact with me, you have to be on gold. So that's what happens. People are just always getting data from gold. And if you have a data scientist, for example, that would like to consume the raw data, guess what happens? Because of this, he would need to consume from gold. And then you have to duplicate the data from silver to gold to make that happen. So that's happening right now. People are doing that, and there's no problem unless you start to feel like the hurdles of it, right? You have data duplication, you're not reusing the logic, you have zero transformation, you have a poor performance because you're not optimizing for the end user, you're not adding groupings, you're not adding like capabilities like summing, you're not building the logics underneath the reporting engine. Okay, so that's the first phase. The second stage is about the awakening of the domain idea. So, and that's the tricky part, and this is where I start to see people truly understanding the whole meaning of the modern data architectures right now, which is eventually you realize that, well, I have my different data sources that comes from different services. Ultimately, I would end up with multiple users table, for example. Like, as you can see in an example, you have Postgres user, you have MySQL user, you have Salesforce user. And if you think about the copy and paste architecture, what's going to happen is you're copying the data all over until the gold to be consumed with minimal transformations. But here, you're being a little bit better, just being smart. Because what you're doing is you realize that users may be a domain inside of your organization, for example. And then what you're doing is you're collapsing all the data of users' data inside of one big table, call it consolidated user. And that's what we call domain. So you can have a user's domain, you can have a transactions domain, you can have a product domain, so on and so forth. And that happens a lot, because now, once you start to share the data from gold, your data analytics team or your data analytics or your analytics engineer, they would look up for the domain tables, and he's going to be able to construct the data pretty easily, because all the merging, all the transformations happen prior to that part. So you're helping your teams to be faster. You are helping them to unlock the best of the Medallion architecture. And also, you're bringing the responsibility to the right place. You don't want your business users to interact with your munging state, with your swamping state, I would say. You just want to make sure that people will be consumed by a cleaned area. And you can go even further. You have two ways to do this. The first one is, sometimes you see customers that they have like heavy transformations between bronze and silver. So the option would be option A, which is adding a technical cleaning path before building your domain table. And the second, you can say, oh no, I'm good. I know what I'm doing. We know that our team is pretty mature to take this data. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the cleaning part because we don't have to replicate the data from bronze and silver. And instead, I'm going to go full-blown to the domain area. And then you can just go straight up to the domains. And that not only happens with the data replication, but it happens with a lot of other things. We start to cover way more. You start to reduce the amount of ETLs. Can you imagine how many ETLs we have by, having all disparate sources, bronze and silver tables? You have a job, you start a job that runs in 2 hours, and eventually you realize they're running 23. Because you're having so many ETLs now to fill up the gaps, each one of these tables, that eventually you ended up with a lot of ETLs running to fill up the data. So here, you're streamlining the process by adding domains table. Does it make sense? Okay. So in the end of the day, silver is no longer a clean state table. It's way more than that. It's just like becomes the semantic core of the business. And if we stop and think for a second and take a step back, that pretty much lines up with the data warehousing, the enterprise data warehousing stack. What we want to make sure is, in some place here inside of the Medallion architecture, You're going to have your facts. You're going to have the clear vision about all the data that is going to be participating of your delivery. Well, now we solved the silver area. We pretty much building the domain tables, but then people start to create a lot of golds. And that's where I see like the gold cut here. We start to be pretty much smart on the silver side, and we relax a little bit on the gold area. And that's a little bit dangerous, because what you're doing right now is, we got smart, we just pushed data from bronze to silver, we consolidated this data into domain tables, and now I'm building golds out of this. But the problem lies here is you have eventually other people sneak in, and also instead of going to your silver zone and building their gold tables, no. Why they should do that, right? I'm gonna just plug inside of this KPI order ops team instead, and we're gonna get the data from there because it's pretty much what I want. I would have to do small transformations to get there. And that's a bummer, because you know what's gonna happen? If, and it's gonna happen eventually, the KPI orders should be residing in different departments, and they're gonna have like different business needs. They're gonna change the structure of this data. And guess what's gonna happen with all the downstream users consuming from this data? Possibly it's gonna break. So that's why we avoid to consume the data from other gold. Instead, we have to plug into the silver layer. So that's the reason why we're establishing a pattern, we establish best practice inside of silver to guarantee that we can deliver the data in the best way as possible. Something that people sometimes underestimate is about the data contracts between the silver and gold. I have seen a lot of people talking about data contracts between the gold and the end user, but they're not talking too much about silver and gold. And guess what happens? Silver layer is our fabric, right? So that's where the point where data engineers are working. They're just doing transformations. They're just doing all the munging, all the stuff. It happens here. So once you release the data, you just want to make sure that's going to go through a contract. This way, you're not breaking any downstreams pipelines connecting to that. So we have the gold sprawl. Silver domains are enforced by the contract layers, unfortunately, and we start to create a lot of golds. And golds can become really expensive in terms of processing. So yeah, you should start to see long waiting times about Spark jobs running by consuming the data, doing other transformations on top of that, and then just sprawled everywhere. But the point is, there has to be a better way. Well, we have seen the chaos, we felt the drift, we fought the gold layer sprawl. So how do we truly design the data lakehouse in a purpose and in a way that could unlock its full capability? So that's funny, because in one of these consulting engagements, the customer had a challenge to transform and operate 10 terabytes of data. And we're thinking about the strategies in how to do that. Customer was struggling a little bit with the domains awakening plus the gold count. A lot of golds being just linked up with other golds. It was super messy. So we started fresh, and we thought about a methodology and how we're going to push into the Medallion Architecture in order to be able to accomplish this whole end-to-end process. So let me show you something. Well, Lakehouse meets discipline. So Data Lakehouse is about scalable data integrations. I never seen Data Lakehouse being used for one data source. I have seen Data Lakehouse being used for many different data sources. Just Kafka, object storage, databases, NoSQL databases, APIs, FTPs, yada, yada. But there's another component, pretty interesting, called Data Vault, which is about a structured and governed integration that sits on top of the data warehousing. So together, they can become like the match made in heaven. And the reason why is both, they were born and raised with the intent to be data integration driven. So let's talk a little bit about Data Vault. Well, Data Vault was first introduced in the 19s by Dan Lindstedt. That guy pretty much picked up the word from Bill Emmons, and he just worked through it. We have had a lot of updates across these last 30 years. He has been updating this methodology since then. And he just worked with really large customers. I don't know if you guys heard about Lockheed Martin. So that's the company behind NASA, behind all these big companies, the DOS. So he just got up for the challenge to be able to ingest petabytes of data. And then ideally in 19s it was a little bit tricky to do that, right? We wouldn't have the same technologies and the same characteristics that we have today. So the idea was, well, now, and mainly because of AI as well, you're generating a lot of data. And eventually data engineers, data scientists, MLOps engineers, whatever you name it, we're going to have to be able to do data transformations. So ideally, you have a lot of data. You just bring this data inputs to a place. You just store them there. But then you have to be able to build a methodology that sits on top on your data warehousing or your data lakehouse that allows you to build something scalable, right? Robust, auditable, and resilient. So here what Dan says is the logical modeling works more than the physical modeling, which means that if you design a data vault, you can either apply inside of your modern data warehousing, such as Snowflake, Databricks, SQL, whatever, or you can push it to the data, to the Medallion architecture. And that's where we're going to see the perfect match between these two systems. They're going to work together in order to offer you the best of breed. So the data vault modeling is just about 3 major entities. We have hubs, links, and satellites. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk in details about each one of them. I'm going to be available all this week here at Summit if you'd like to hear more about Data Vault. Also, yesterday we had a talk about data modeling strategy. What is a workshop that ran on Monday. They're going to run this workshop on Thursday as well. They talk about the different modeling techniques, pretty interesting. If you have a chance, and if you're interested by the topic, I strongly recommend you to do so. So basically what it's doing is, is what we call the raw data vault. And we're going to see in a picture all the layers, how they establish and how they're organized inside of the Medallion architecture. But the hubs is the business object. It hosts all the metadata and keys, which is the business key. So imagine, for example, that you have a user, and that user is not recognized by the user ID, because user ID spans across different sources. And user ID 1 in Salesforce, it doesn't mean that it's user ID 1 in MySQL. So how do we make this link? So we have to have a business key. So the key of this modeling technique is to have a business key to group, to link this data. So let's imagine, for example, that SSN would be like the user key. So we're going to host all the keys in a hub. We're going to host all the distributed attributes of a user in the satellites. We're going to push all the attributes to there, except for the key. And then we're going to have the links, which basically is the joins between the different hubs. So what happens is, I no longer have SCD anymore, because the key is decoupled from the descripted attributes. We don't have to handle this anymore. We are handling with a pen-only technique, which is ingesting for you to get the latest updates. So here, you no longer have SCD. You can get the latest update from your table look about the descriptive information, and it's pretty fast, because we don't have to check whenever you're ingesting data into this model. We don't have to check for a business if the business key already exists in a hub. So let's say, for instance, that we have a user that got like the birth column updated. The social security number is the same. We don't have to touch in the hub. The link between that user and the transaction is already established. I don't have to do that as well. The only change that I have to propagate is on the satellite, which is a new entry of the scripted attribute, which means that this model is made for pretty intensive write operations. And that helps a lot. in a world where we have to ingest fast, we have to deliver even faster, and we have to make sure that everything's working concisely end to end. So how do we plot the data vault inside of Medallion architecture? That's a little bit challenge, but let me show you how we are usually doing this. And first, we have your data that comes from gold. This is what we call our persistent staging area, which is our bronze area, which is our staging area, is the same. So then, as per the characteristics of bringing data from bronze to silver, ideally, what you wanted to do is you have to maintain the same granularity of the data that you're bringing. So we add here hard business rules. So what we're doing here, guys, is that we bring a methodology inside of the Medallion architecture in order to be able to deliver the best of its capability. So we're adding hard business rules that are going to guarantee data quality rules, that are hard business rules that is going to guarantee that we're not going to change the granularity of the data. Now, here's the interesting part, the silver zone. So there's a lot of people fighting against which is the best model to use in Medallion architecture, and I don't think this way. I think that there's no one size fits all. There's no model that comes with all the bells and whistles. But if we bring all of them in a structured way, in a methodology, we may have like the best model out there. And this is how I think, and that's how I usually approach systems, and it's been working really great. We have this first entry, which is the raw data vault, about the objects that I showed you right now, like previously, the hubs, links, and satellites. So we store this data inside of the silver layer. We push all the silver data to there. We maintain the historical information so it becomes auditable. We just make sure that that's a pen only, so extremely fast. They are persistent tables. Secondly, we have an extra layer that sits inside of inside of the data vault, which is the business vault. And that's interesting, because now what we're doing is we are building the same vision of the raw data vault. We are not changing the grain of the data, but look at this. We are allowing people to consume this data, and we don't have to release it inside of Gold anymore, because we can create views that sits on top of the raw data vault, and we can allow people to get into this zone that is still organized, because we have different other type of tables that we can deliver, like snapshotting of the data, latest registry, historical information of that. And we can apply all the transformations without conflicting to anyone. So now data engineers, instead of your data analytics team sharing the data for the Gold, what you can allow them is that they can tap and play, they can plug and play into the business vault and can still consume the data that they want to consume without me replicating the data. And that's the best part. Now, since we went through the bronze to silver, we just did the transformations, the cleansing, we did the verification, we did the matching, the uniformization of the data. Now, we can add soft business rules, which is truly changing the meaning of the data somehow. So we are adding total spend, we are adding customer segment, for example, and we're adding some metadata layers on top of that to make sure that you can track this from back to source. And now you can choose which model you want to deliver. Isn't that good? We don't have to fight anymore saying, hey, let's use Data Vault. Let's use source schema. Let's use OBTs. Instead, you're going to take a different approach. You're going to access your customer. You're going to understand the business requirements. You're going to understand all the needs that the customer wants. And based on that, you're going to deliver the best Gold experience that they can usually have. You don't have to pick between OBTs and storage schemas, because you have a well-structured foundational layer that's sitting on silver layer. Now you can build anything you want. You can build views, you can build a gigantic storage schema, you can even, we have customers that we don't house anymore the SCD changes on the storage schema. We're doing that once a week, we're reprocessing the storage schema again, just picking the latest data from the silver, because now we can do this. And what they're doing is that instead of handling SCD, which is pretty expensive, you don't have to do this anymore. You're just taking the data from silver, because that became your gold standard place where you can just plug into it and deliver the data in the way you want. We don't have to fight about what's the best model anymore. We are now thinking the best way in how we're going to make changes through a methodology that truly works. Well, just looking a little bit how we're going to build this on Databricks and Data Vault. Yeah, what's going to realize is that once you get off this session, you're going to see a lot of articles of Databricks talking a bunch of Data Vault. And there's like amazing ways to do this. You can ingest the data through CDC capabilities. You can just add DLT to run your journaling tables, your bronze tables. You're going to create a Data Vault for Unity Catalog, just hubs, links, and sets. Eventually, you're going to have your business data sitting there as well through like materialized views if you want. And then you're going to deliver in the way you want. MARTs, OBTs, virtualizations, applications, whatever you want. And the best part is you have the freedom now to offer to the analytics engineer to use DBT, SQL Mesh, whatever you want, to plug either on the information delivery layer or into the business layer, allowing them to make any changes they want without sacrificing the data engineering changes, because we are working two different silos. This is just a little bit of picturing how we would build that. Here, this is like a use case where we ingest trillions of data through the vault using DLT, and then you should see something around that. And the next question is, are you up for the challenge, right? So I brought up the 19-day challenge. This is something that I used to do with the customers, talking a little bit about the steps that you're going to take in order to bring that methodology, this process, into your requirements, into your business, right? So first you access and you have the awakening part. The second part is where you design and align your goals, just building the POC and setting captives on board. And lastly, you deliver and celebrate this, because eventually you want to make sure that you're following a procedure. This is what we just built as like a skeleton to deliver to customers. And we have been following this across the board, and it's just working pretty well so far. And I mean, just the last message is that trust isn't built overnight, but starts in 19 days. Embrace the Data Lakehouse and architecture data future now. I want to say thank you so much for being in the session, and I hope that was fruitful. Don't forget to complete your survey, and thank you so much.